Hello, welcome to another of the Life Rooms Wellbeing videos. My name's Chris. I work for Intuitive Thinking Skills. What I'd like to discuss today is the follow-on from the earlier video you may have seen on addiction. I'd like to start by recapping some of the topics we discussed on that first video. We talked about addiction. We tried to define addiction. What is the problem? And we discussed ambivalence. It's the push me, pull you. You may see the image behind me, the conflict you have towards alcohol and drugs. Yeah, that this conflict, this internal debate, it's the relationship you have with alcohol and drugs. That's the problem. It's almost like you're being pulled in two opposing directions. Part of you wants to continue to do it, and yet part of you hates what you do. This internal conflict, this ambivalence is illustrated with the push me, pull you. And we talked about why we have this conflict, the science of addiction, the role of the midbrain and the amygdala, how its job is to remember pleasure, yeah, and encourage us to indulge more. If you walk past a fish and chip shop and smell fish and chips, part of your brain remembers that and says, "Woo, I remember that. Why don't we go and do it?" This process works exactly the same way for alcohol and drugs. We mentioned the noise of a can being opened. Something in here pops up and says, "I remember that." This is so important to understand that we're talking about a predictable response. This is why you get thoughts about drinking or taking drugs when in familiar situations, people or places that you may have used before. You know, if you switch on the TV and you see someone drinking a cold pint of beer, it pops up and says, "I remember that." Yeah, and it encourages you. What it does is it creates cravings. Yeah? So cravings, when we talk about craving alcohol or drugs, it's important to understand it's managing or dealing with these cravings, which is important. I'd like to talk to you about some of the skills that we mentioned on the first one. We talked about transposing, recognizing this part of you, it, that wants to continue to use. And we said about applying skills to that. When it pops up, we recognize it, recognizing cravings and responding to them. It wants to use, I don't use anymore. This simple skill ends that debate. It's ending that argument. When we approach stopping, yeah, stopping or staying stopped, there can be stress attached to this. Yeah, you know, when you crave, it's almost like there's two people in your head arguing the case. You don't want to use. You're all too aware of the chaos and misery it brings to yourself, your friends, your family, and countless others. But remember, it believes it must have drink or drugs to survive, because it comes from this survival system, this midbrain. Yeah? Its job is to make sure that your basic needs are met. Food, warmth, water. When you introduce it to addictive substances, it wrongly believes that you need them too. So it nags, and it nags. And it nags some more. It's essentially just a debate about whether or not you're going to use. But it can be devious and nasty, appearing to be both your friend or your enemy. When you're actually giving it what it wants, it is almost like it's your best friend. It puts its arm around you, tells you you'll be okay and everything will be fine. And yet, when you start saying no to it, it suddenly becomes your worst enemy, nagging, moaning, pushing you, trying to convince you to use. This debate, this argument, creates anxiety, it creates stress. The anxiety and the argument and the stress increases as that debate increases. Should I, shouldn't I, will I, won't I? Its anxiety increases as the debate increases. So when it pops up, we simply start applying skills to it. It wants to use, I don't. If you practice transposing, it wants it, I don't. whenever it pops up, you'll soon find that the anxiety starts to melt away. But if you say, well, maybe just, you'll find you've left a foothold, which it will jump on. It will jump on and try and suggest that you use. And when we make statements of, I'm just going to take it one day at a time, how do you think it might respond to that? Do you think it might say, okay, see you tomorrow? It's about saying no and meaning no, recognizing it and saying no and being absolutely certain, no, never. It wants to use, I don't use anymore. Think about situations that you may find yourself in. What might it say? What might it suggest? Yeah. At home alone, it would pop up and suggest that drink or drugs is a good idea. It wants to do it, I don't. What about with other people? You may be with people that you've drank or used with before, and it will pop up and suggest that drinking or taking drugs is a good idea. When it pops up, it wants to use, I don't use anymore. For every situation that you could discuss, it's probably worth asking, would the opposite equally stand true? If I'm working, would it pop up? If I'm not working, would it pop up? If I'm on holiday, if I'm not on holiday, for every situation that you use, it would pop up and suggest that drinking or using is just the solution. Taking responsibility is key to dealing with it. Never forget, it talks and chats in your head. It's a separate part of you, like a little devil that's hatching plans to go and use. This is the voice that you've been arguing with over these past years. And our job is to silence it. It will give you many fabulous excuses and reasons to go and use. But you need to challenge these. You need to see them for the nonsense that they are. It uses words which excuse using. It tries to justify using. And it tries to suggest that it's not your fault. It uses words like just one, when it never actually is just one. Now's not the right time. When is the time to stop? Nobody will know. But actually, won't you know? Everybody drinks. Is that true? The language of addiction, the labels of addiction are picked up along the way. We talk about addicts and alcoholics. You know, ask yourself, when did you suddenly become an alcoholic or become an addict, or were we simply exposed to the language and identified with that and thought, that actually sounds a bit like me, and picked up that label? It's not my fault. I can't help myself. While at the same time, helping yourself to something. Key to this is challenging those negative language and those labels and letting it know that you will no longer feed it with excuses. I do hope you found this video useful. For more information, please feel free to contact the Life Rooms, where the staff will be more than happy to help. Thanks a lot for your time.